Factorising quadratic trinomials is something you really need to get under control very, very quickly. So on the board we've got 4 different examples. They all have the same numbers, but there are different signs in each one, different combinations of plus and minus. So when we go to factorise a quadratic trinomial, we always look at the last term, the constant at the end, and we always need to find 2 numbers that are factors of 6. So with 6 we know that it could be 2 and 3, or it could be 6 and 1. Then when we look at the sign before the 6, that tells us whether we need 2 numbers that have to add to be the coefficient of x, or if they have to have the difference between them, that is a coefficient of x. So with this first one, we need 2 numbers that multiply to be 6 and they have to add to be 5. It must be 2 and 3. Because it ends in a plus, that tells us that both signs will be the same, and the first sign tells us what that sign will be, so they'll both be plus. Now when we look at this next example, it ends in a plus, so we know the 2 numbers have to add to equal 5. So it has to be 2 and 3 again. It ends in a plus, which tells us the signs will be the same, and the first sign is negative, so they will both be negatives. When we look at this next example, it doesn't end in a plus, it ends in a minus. So those 2 numbers that multiply to be 6, the difference between them has to be the coefficient of x. So the 2 numbers we need this time are 6 and 1, because the difference between 6 and 1 is 5. Because this ends in a negative at the end, so it's minus 6, that tells us the signs will be different, and the plus here tells us that the bigger number will be a positive. And for the last example, it ends in a minus. We know the difference between the 2 numbers has to be 5, so it has to be 6 and 1. And because it ends in a negative, we know the signs will be different, and this tells us that the bigger number will be a negative. And you can check these. You can always check these by doing a quick expand to make sure you've got all your numbers and all your signs in the right places.